Okay, so we are ready and live and ready to go, Sarah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to Casper, our tech support. Welcome everyone today to our Google Hangout. This is intended to be an informal discussion forum around youth unemployment and how in ActionAid we're beginning our analysis and thinking how we want to tackle the issue of youth unemployment across the Federation. So good morning, good afternoon to friends and colleagues from around the Federation. Before I jump into the agenda for today, perhaps we could start with a little bit of a round of introductions. If you'd like to share your name and your country that you're based in, and if you have one interesting fact about youth unemployment from your country, please also share that. So perhaps we'll start with our colleagues in Vietnam.
Hi everyone, I'm Thi, policy coordinators, and my colleagues.
Hello, my name's Anne. I'm just support officer.
And then I will have like quick summary about the youth program in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we have around 44% that is youth, and normally many youth in the rural area they are out of jobs. And for example, for the youth, they graduate from universities. 1/10 of them don't have a job. And recently, Vietnam going to join TPP as well as STAs and other BITs in the future. So it means that we will have more land loss, and also that the number of youth will be out of the job very soon. And then a lot of them have to migrate to the big cities like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City to find a job due to the economic change in the future. That is a very short introduction about Vietnam.
Great. Thank you, Tui, and we'll certainly come back to hear more about the context and your plans in Vietnam. Perhaps that's great, thank you. So colleagues from Vietnam, perhaps we'll move over for brief introductions from Nicole, please.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm the youth advisor in ActionAid DRC. I'm not sure what else you guys said in the introductions.
That's great. Do you have one interesting fact about youth unemployment from DRC that you could share with us?
Youth unemployment in DRC is probably running at about 80 or 90%. And so most employment is generally self-employment, so there's very little in the formal sector at all.
Great, thanks very much. Over to Sammy, please.
Hi everyone, I hope you guys can hear me properly. I am Sami, working with ActionAid Bangladesh's youth program. In terms of an interesting fact from Bangladesh, so we have a population of around 160 million, and around 55 million of them are young people, and only half of them, it's actually 48% of them, are actively within the labor force. So it goes to show what the state of youth unemployment is like in the country.
Great, thanks very much, Sammy. And Soren, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Soren Ambrose. I am the head of Policy Advocacy and Research. Sarah is part of my team. I'm based in Nairobi. I'm with the International Secretariat, so I don't know anything about Kenya, but I can testify that there are a lot of young people who seem to be unemployed.
Great, thanks very much, Soren. And Yasna?
Hi everyone, this is Yasna from ActionAid Bangladesh. Currently I'm speaking from Dhaka and from the ActionAid Bangladesh office. I'm working as a Youth and Governance Fellow, and I've joined very recently, but I can tell you that the youth of Bangladesh are currently engaging themselves more than in politics and in education, and they're actually the largest population who are unemployed and also taking part in other decision making and holding duty bearers accountable from their own sectors, whether it's urban or rural.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you to everyone. So just to remind everyone, so I'm the International Youth Policy Advisor based here in London. Youth unemployment remains a big concern still in the UK, and there's been some recent challenges around the government's rollout of apprenticeship. As being a potential panacea, sort of saviour for lots of youth unemployment issues. There's a lot of challenge around that at the moment here in the UK. Thank you very much. So today's session, I'll just briefly introduce this session, give a bit on the aim and the background, and also bring in Soren and his ideas on plutocracy, and from an international perspective what we're hoping to begin some analysis around. And then perhaps we'll move into some mini country overviews. So we've got those coming from Bangladesh, DRC and Vietnam, and then we open out into some wider discussion and future planning. So the aim of this hangout today is to be an initial scoping on how we want to tackle the issue of youth unemployment, and for some of us in ActionAid we might talk more broadly around economic empowerment. We've got two guiding questions as we go through the hangout today. So what are you currently doing in your country to tackle youth unemployment and how? And what would you like to be doing regarding tackling youth economic empowerment in the future? This all obviously is based around our human rights-based approach. So we're looking to challenge some of the dominant narratives and mainstream approaches out there at the moment, particularly around sort of individual social enterprise, and really looking at the core of our narrative in ActionAid on how we might tackle youth unemployment. We've started some very initial analysis. One piece of work that came in from some LSE students encouraged us very much to look at the connections between our governance work with young people and how we tackle youth unemployment. So we've all heard in many of the countries we work with that young people will say, yes, we want to be involved in decision making, yes, we want to have greater accountability on our governments, but at the end of the day we need to be able to feed our families. So that's the stark reality that we all work with. So we're really now trying to think, what is this connection between our approaches for increasing economic youth empowerment, as well as the governance call that many young people are calling out for. We are also just beginning some interesting workshops, and I believe Yasna and Sami will tell us about the one that just happened in Bangladesh, as a way of working with young people to think about how we tackle unemployment for young people. And perhaps now I'll just hand over to Soren very briefly, who can perhaps give us some of the broader organisational framing that ActionAid foresees where youth unemployment could play a strong part. So the whole area of plutocracy and inequality. So Soren, over to you, please.
Thanks, Sarah. Some of you may have seen a message from Adriano, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, about a joint statement that ActionAid helped coordinate with 5 other international NGOs on the in the International Secretariat. We're trying to expand upon that and determine how it can be useful for all of us as a framing device. So the thing I want to emphasize here is that this is not a standalone new campaign or something like that. It is a way of cooperating with other NGOs at the global level, and for ActionAid it is a way of framing the work that we do already. So we believe that almost all of the work that we do can fit within the frame of inequality, 1%, or plutocracy. By plutocracy, we mean rule by a very wealthy elite and a very small elite. Our concern is that the political systems in our countries have gotten to the point where they are controlled almost wholly by the very wealthy, and therefore working for policy change is made very difficult because they're mostly accountable to the people with the most money. And the direct connection I see to youth unemployment here is that we have seen that the youth unemployment problem has been diagnosed for a number of years now. The idea of jobless growth, that's a phrase that we've been hearing for 10 years. But we have not seen any substantial moves in very many countries to address it. And this includes the North and the South. The people started to pay attention in the North when Italy and Spain reported record youth unemployment numbers, but of course we've known about this in Africa and other parts of the developing world for a long time. So how do we change this? How do we make the governments accountable to the people, and in this case, to the young people who are coming out of university, coming out of secondary school, and unable to get any jobs? So I don't have the answers, but I think that's the question, and I think what we have to do is push up against the current power structures and look at ways to shift or share power so that we start to see some responsiveness from the governments that we haven't seen before. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks very much, Soren, for that framing. I think that idea of shifting power will keep as a theme throughout the discussions today. So what we'll do now is we'll go over to our little mini country overviews. Please try and keep these to sort of 2 to 3 minutes so that we make sure that we can cover each country. And the guiding question here is, what are you currently doing to tackle youth unemployment and how? And please try and keep that grounded in your specific human rights-based approach. So perhaps if we can start off with Nicole in DRC, and then we'll move over to Tui and Anne in Vietnam, and then over to Sami and Yasna in Bangladesh. And what I'd suggest is that we all keep questions, and we ask the questions as a whole group afterwards. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, over to Nicole, please.
Okay, so in DRC we've been engaged with a fairly new but fairly large project that we've... Hello? Okay, so we've been working on a fairly new but it's a large project called the Super Donor Project. I don't know if any other countries have the Super Donor who's been implementing projects in their countries. But one of the main components is actually youth empowerment and access to employment in DRC. And so part of that process is actually building training centers for youth to have professional skills in order to be able to engage with the job market that is around them. And so one of the first things we did was to actually do a study to evaluate what the different market opportunities were for youth employment. And so this included trying to figure out which activities were best for youth. And so part of that study, youth were engaged in the research itself, and the results of that research were shared in a participatory process, in which case the youth actually decided what the training areas would be for the professional development centers that we are building. 2,000 youth across 3 LRPs are targeted by the project. Most recently, we've tried to establish a way for business development for these youth who are going through the programs to occur, because the youth are going to be put into groups in order to work together to actually be empowered and build their businesses. And so the groups have also subgroups, and each of these subgroups is actually going to receive training from the National Microfinance Fund. which will give them access to financial services. And so youth are actually going to be engaging in some of the more mainstream services that they were actually excluded from. And so it's actually access to not necessarily what I'll call public services from the state, but at least financial services that are more officialized. And so in that sense, youth are being empowered in creating their own employment, actually creating sustainable businesses with access to guidance and funding for these businesses, as well as getting the training. And so it's become a holistic approach on youth employment. And each of these groups that we're creating are either between 17 and 25 people, depending on where in the country they're located. And so there's actually quite a bit of action going on in terms of youth employment in DRC. Slightly different east and west. In the west, it's a lot more of an entrepreneurial approach. In the east, it's a lot more an approach that is going through the different civil society groups that we do have on location. It just matches with different cultural backgrounds that we have, urban and rural environments as well, because we do have that diversity across the project.
Great, thanks Nicole. That sounds a really interesting approach involving training centres, financial services, that holistic approach that you've mentioned very well. We'll hang on to any questions for Nicole until we've gone through everyone's mini presentations. So now if we move over to colleagues in Vietnam, please.
In Vietnam, we have one project related to the youth employment. Before we carry out some not vocational training, but we have some like job training something. But before we carry out some training for the youth in the ethnic minority area, we have the training need assessment. That's what we do differently comparing to other projects before. So it is good because all the participants, they want to join that training course, because normally we just have them for training course in on agriculture, how to plant passion fruit, some kind of land that they can sell in the area. Because we have that training need assessment, so those youth are very interested in the trainings, and the income will increase accordingly after they join the training. It's not too much, but it is enough for them to cover the living conditions. We carry out that one for nearly 2 years already, and then we continue to support in some other area around that areas as well. And the target group that is mostly vulnerable youth, like ethnic minorities, and in the far from cities. It is in the mountainous areas nearby Lao border. That is what we have done before. And in the future, the second question, Bryce.
Sure, Troy. Perhaps we'll come back to the future in a moment. So that's great.
Okay.
That's just perfect. Thank you very much for sharing that. So real focus there on Vietnam with around working with particular ethnic minorities and the whole approach via vocational training and the importance of having a needs assessment. So thank you for sharing those components of your existing work. We'll go over to Bangladesh, and then we've also recently had Timothy from Uganda join us, which is great. So Timothy, if you can follow on from Bangladesh, that would be wonderful. So over to Sami and Yasna, please.
Thanks, Sarah. So in Bangladesh, we have a separate livelihood team working, but there hasn't been a specific focus on young people till now. What we've seen through our consultations with young people in the rural and urban areas is that most of the people outside of the cities, they're involved in agricultural activities and primarily in their family businesses, but this is not something that they're keen to be involved in. We have there is a Ministry of Youth and Sports, under which there is a Department of Youth Development to provide training to young people at the district level, but this rarely goes down to the sub-district level, and that is something that we have been focusing on a lot. So there are other organizations working on providing technical vocational education training, and the DYD itself provides small credit schemes to the different youth organizations. But we see that there is a serious lack of soft skills development, which we have been sort of focused a lot recently. So developing the skills of young people in terms of leadership, communication, advocacy, and lobbying, so that they can actually go up to the duty bearers, go up to employers, and actually ask for jobs. In our program work over the past couple of years, I would say there has been a slight focus in making linkages with institutions such as the DYD and other employers in the local area. And what we did recently was a workshop with Unexpect. It was a social designathon focusing on young people and economic empowerment. What we did as part of the workshop, I wasn't there, so I'll ask Yasha to join in. But what the basic idea was to come up with 6 different personalities, individuals who represent the different phases of young people. And we brought in a lot of our young people from the LRCs and a lot of young people from other organizations to come up with sort of alternatives to these scenarios. So I mean, Yasha, if you can just briefly give them an idea of what
Yeah.
it's about.
So this is a very interesting research tool that we used in the workshop. They actually created the 7 personas depending on their social and cultural or financial backgrounds. It varied from a young farmer wife who has 2 children and lives in the village and in the northern Bangladesh to the very young indigenous girl who wants to migrate, or there is a migrant boy who wants to go to overseas for job. And along with them we had some different personas like a university graduated youth who is looking for jobs and is currently unemployed, or a young boy who is 15 years old and belongs from the slum. He has to support his family because he has to continue his studies and take care of his ailing father. So there were some disability issues also. These characters and personas were the themes we had given to the participants at the workshop, and they actually came up with brilliant ideas, each involving one or more different technologies or different internet options to ease up their employment skills and opportunities. More like they actually focused on irrigating the lands with the hand looms they rotate by hands, and producing electricity to irrigate the lands with their own pumps, the pumps that will run by the hand looms. These were some interesting thoughts, and also they tried to use drone technology to monitor their crop fields. These came out from the brains from the urban and rural youths. Even some indigenous youth came into the workshop, and they actually focused on how to produce more indigenous goods and bring it to the social enterprise theme. And they actually incorporated their entire business motivation or the social enterprise motivation, and they took it further to the community level, and they tried to incorporate whether it would go to their community or to the persona and the persona's background, that whether it will go, they will be able to do it, or it will be possible to implement it within next 3 years or more than that.
Thanks. Oh, thanks, Yasna, for sharing some information about the Unexpect workshops and the idea of using potential social design as solutions from some of the young people we work with. That workshop will also be happening in Uganda shortly. But before we move on to questions, Timothy, who recently joined us, do you have 2 minutes? If you could just share very briefly what ActionAid Uganda is currently doing in terms of trying to tackle youth unemployment in Uganda, please. Hi, Timothy. Are you there?
So Timothy is struggling to hear at the moment, so maybe we just
Okay.
move along. Sorry about that.
That's a shame, but not to worry. So what we'll do now is we'll move on to any questions that anyone had for any of our country presenters. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. Sammy?
Yeah, so my question was for Vietnam. I'm sorry, I mean, the line wasn't very clear, but could you just explain, like, how exactly is ActionAid supporting the young people in the border areas? Like, are you giving capacity support, or are you linking them up with different institutions? And
So, Tui and Anne, I think that was a question for you. Were you able to hear it? Perhaps, Sammy, if you could type it as well, please.
Yeah, you can hear.
Great. So I think it was a question about the specific nature, the type of support for the young people.
Okay. In Vietnam, in the mountainous area, we support the youth to attend some training class, how to plant passion fruit, and some like mushroom, and some other that they also can join some class how to raise fish in Vietnam. That is because we have around 4 or 5 type of class. Because the most successful that is the passion fruit. Because from that we have one factory connected to the area, and then after the farmer, especially the youth, when they just plant their passion fruit, and then the people they can sell for the factory directly. That is the most successful. And the others like mushroom and raising fish in the area, that is also good because they can sell to the local market. And we also have some kind of fruit in the area, and then it depends the area that what kind of fruit they can plant.
And we also support a loan with the revolving fund in ARP for economic development, and support just with to study on good economic models.
Great, thanks very much to Vietnam. So Timothy's having trouble joining, so I'm just going to type some of the questions so we can follow what Timothy wants to add in the Skype chat in a moment. I had one question, and this was for Nicole in DRC. So going back to this question of how we're really getting an ActionAid flavour to our work, and connecting economic empowerment with governance, so good accountability, etc. Has there been any discussion around a collective approach with your training centre models? And indeed, what is the system of accountability that's been set up with regard to the training centres?
Okay. I'm going to start with the easy question for the accountability mechanisms of the training centers, because this is actually something that's ironically regulated by law in Congo. There's a ministerial decree on management of youth centers, which actually mandates that youth have to be part of the, I guess it would be the board of administrators. And so in this case, we're actually just using that type of structure in order to have youth, especially from our implementing partner, to be part of the management structure of the centers itself. So in that sense, that one is actually a fairly easy question because national law actually mandates that. Then I guess for the slightly more challenging, how are we putting an ActionAid flavor to the center and to the entire project itself? I think it started, we'd have to look at the beginning of the project where the first activities we did had nothing to do with the centers. The first activities we conducted with the partners and those who were conducting the identification was actually an HRBA training. And in order to then be able to set the criteria to identify vulnerability and to be able to then from there work with the most vulnerable so that they access the opportunities and get the different empowerment that was needed. And so in that sense, I think it starts from the beginning and it sort of runs as a thread through the entire project itself. Then I think it comes also with our local partner who, in a collaborative way, it was actually the youth who selected what they were going to be studying in the process. And then we looked at the different sort of mechanisms that would empower youth in the best way. And that's actually how we ended up with collaboration that's probably going to end up with the National Microfinance Fund, because they were actually providing the most empowering approach to business training that we found on location. And so it was actually quite interesting because they do actually provide a lot more opportunities for youth. And so in that case, we've probably worked quite a bit more on the empowerment and solidarity, mainly because in the projects themselves, we've actually worked with several youth organizations that maybe had not worked together before. I think especially in Kinshasa, I can say it's definitely a first time that we've brought together over 30 youth organizations to support the process and conduct the identification of vulnerable youth and develop all the different criteria and actually even working with the government structures. And so I think it's been quite interesting because there's been this almost interface between governance and youth themselves. It's been quite interesting because the ministry has been actually quite involved.
Really interesting.
So,
Thank you. Sorry, Nicole, did you have something? Yeah, carry on.
Yes, and so we're actually considering putting the youth in, well, not considering, but the youth are going to be in the management of the centers, and it might actually be a joint management with the state itself, which is actually going to be quite interesting in terms of governance because youth are going to be directly working with the state for the centers that we may be handing over to the state itself and the youth.
Really interesting case for us to follow, particularly going back to Soren's comment about the ActionAid wider framing around shifting power. So it'd be really interesting to see that as a local, on a local scale, how the accountability and the decision making in particular teeters out between youth groups and the relevant government bodies. So really interesting, and I guess also not just looking at terms in terms of our programming campaigning work, but also we're planning to influence and shift policy around youth unemployment and ways that we tackle this. So this now leads me into our next section, which is really for us to just do some brainstorming and to listen to all of you in terms of what you would like to be doing regarding youth economic and power in the future. So questions out to you all now would be, what questions do we still need to be asking ourselves? And yeah, let's start with that. So open to anyone now.
I mean, from our end, one thing that we would really like to focus on is the case of migration and rights. Because what we've seen is there is a lot of, we have around 14,000 million Bangladeshis living abroad, and they're spending in a lot of remittance to the country. But we've seen a lot of cases of violation of rights for these migrants, and sort of how we can work towards this. And it's not just external migration, it's also happening internally. So we have a lot of domestic migration. And like making sure that there are jobs available for young people in the areas where they live. So when I was talking about capacity development opportunities in the sub-district for young people through the government agencies, how do we sort of make sure that they're actually providing the skills that young people are looking for? And how we can actually develop the skills of young people to actually go up to these agencies and actually ask for these things. Because there is a lack of, I mean, what we see is there is a lack of clarity, communication skills, and confidence within the young people. So that's where we bring in the whole soft skills sort of thing, aspect of things. And now that we're having a global platform in Bangladesh, it's also something that we will look into potentially utilizing in targeting this. And another thing is building on the point I was talking about before, making sure that there is a competency-based assessment for skills development, and making sure that the government actually is sort of giving that sort of like a central recognition to certain skills that young people get. Because we recently have fresh draft of the national youth policy where the government is actually talking about this, but exactly how this is going to be taken forward, which body is going to be responsible for implementing this, none of this is clear. So this is something we want to tackle from a policy perspective as well.
Thanks, Sammy. I'm afraid I couldn't quite hear all of that, but perhaps you can also just write in some of your key top points for us. I did hear you talking about how to provide skills that young people are looking for. This has been a dominant narrative in institutional narratives. I mean, the UN has been talking about this, I think, for the last 15 years. So it's going back to what Soren was saying, that there still remains some huge barriers and potentially structural issues that need to be addressed in terms of getting the right skills that young people want. And maybe it's initiatives like beginning to happen in DRC that might show some learning in that area. Great. Yasna, I wonder if you also had anything that you would like to share, particularly coming from the Unexpect workshop, and if there was any directions that were given by the young people at that workshop in terms of the future and strengthening our work. I had two aspects to this that I was particularly to hear more about. One was there any discussion around youth and public services and economic empowerment tackling youth unemployment? And the other was, during the workshop, were there any advocacy or potential policy moments that the outputs from the workshop produced?
Okay, first one is the youth in public services, right? So I'll start with that. Youth in public services, they actually mentioned to held more rights of the disabled people, the youth with disabilities. They actually have very limited access to the public services, and they actually have many more difficulties before they even start to take jobs. They so this points were mentioned, but not specifically what you're asking was mentioned in the workshop. Though the youth, the personas I was talking about before, the youth from the university and who have recently graduated, they are these are the largest amount of people, interested people, who want to join in the public services and serve the nation. And also there are some other issues relating to the quota system. The discussion actually evolved around the situation of currently Bangladeshi Public Services Commissions and their decisions regarding engaging youth in more public services. And this was the fact. And other was, I'm sorry, I lost it. Could you please remind me?
Yeah, sorry. So the second question was just around if there was any discussion on the output, so the outcomes. You were telling us about all those interesting ideas that the young people had from the workshop, and if there was any connection to any national advocacy or national work to change youth unemployment policy.
Well, we are still sorting out that because their ideas actually were crazy, and this was a crazy workshop where they actually put up some models and plays and toys. And they, if you go to the website, the social designers on website and the storyboard.com, you can see that they have developed some of their issues and some of their ideas into a storyboard. So we are planning to work on that, and we are planning to put some more efforts to make it and to the level of advocacy and lobbying production from the ideas based on what their needs were. They actually wanted more social enterprises than developing own business or going into the corporate field. Eventually they tried to gather some indigenous thoughts and food and milk processing ideas rather than joining the public services. That would be the very interesting fact.
Interesting. Thanks, Yasna. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite catch all of that, but I did hear very much that the young people in your workshop were particularly interested in a social enterprise model rather than joining and seeking employment in state public services. So thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. And I guess, again, early work that started in ActionAid around social enterprise. Important to flag up here that we very much aren't taking an individualistic narrative around social enterprise. So pilots and work that has already started and hopefully will be starting next year in Ghana is going to be looking at what's the collective approach, potentially a human rights-based approach to social enterprise. Okay, thank you very much. And I guess finally, just to hear very quickly from Tui and Anne in Vietnam, if you would like to share anything in terms of what you would like to be doing in the future with regard to tackling the issue of youth unemployment.
Actually, for Vietnam in the futures, we will have to cope with the migrations issues, because when we join the TPP, so many youth they will migrate from the rural area to the urban area, and one of the issues that is the urban poverty in Vietnam will happen very soon. Because they will be lost land in the future, so they have to migrate to the industries in the cities. After we signing many FTAs and TPPs, after we join that, so in the futures we will focus more on the migrations, youth migrations, because actually for the migration they will be more difficult to access to the public services in the new area. Because normally we must have like a family certificate in the area that they stay, so they can access to the public services like access to the health insurance or something like that. Moreover, the youth in the rural area, they don't have awareness about their rights. So when they approach the new area, that is one of our issues. They cannot have enough knowledge to access all the public services in the new area, because the youth, they will have their young kids. Because in Vietnam, the rural area youth, they will marry quite early, and then they will have like young kids. Because in Vietnam, the youth we counting from like 15 to 30s in some document. So around 20 or 25, they get married already, and it means that the young family, it is quite difficult to access to public services in Vietnam. And in the public services in Vietnam, it divides into different ministries. For example, health is different, education difference, employment difference, and we have the youth committees or youth unions. Actually, they are those people who manage the youth activities. But for the public services like health or education and unemployment, it goes through different ministries. actually. So it means that when we want to focus on any sector, we have to cooperate separately with each. For advocacy, we have to cooperate separately to focus on the youth support. So in the futures, we want to improve the youth in terms of reproductive health, employment. So it means that we have to cooperate with some institutions, vocational institutions like vocational training, something. So it means that we have to devise what is the key thing we should focus on. And Vietnam also have one problem that is about the reproductive health, because we are the first country in the world have high ratio of abortion as well. It means that when we work in the industries, they are lacking of knowledge about protect themselves. So maybe they can have sex without condom or something. So that is also the news issue for the youth, because in Vietnam, due to the local context, people are afraid of talking about reproductive health. Actually, that is very different comparing to Western country or other countries. That is one of our concerns, because actually it is very easy in Vietnam to have abortions. That is also one of the, and then we not decided yet what to do in the futures, but we still focus on the migrants.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Tui. That sounds really interesting. And I guess in terms of that connection between sexual reproductive health and securing decent livelihoods, we've also got the Young Urban Women Project, which has been running in India, Ghana, and South Africa. So I can certainly help connect you to that team as you think about the dynamic between SRH and livelihoods and economic empowerment. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're just coming up to finally wrapping up. I wonder, before I do that, if anyone had any final questions or comments? Nicole?
Yeah, so I had a brief chat with one of our local partners who's right beside me. And in terms of policy issues that he noted that were very important to him was actually in regards to the commercial sector. We need to work on a climate of investment because there's actually a lack of overall opportunities. And so he wanted to talk about the more macro creating opportunities in general, not just for youth, but because here in result of what they called the Great Pillage, almost every single large company pulled out of the country. And then that was followed with basically 20 years of war. It's basically completely killed the investment climate in terms of what are companies that employ people in general. There's some mining activity, but that is not what is generally an employment sector. And then that ties to the next issue, which is actually peace building, because youth are the ones who are, in our case, generally the most targeted in terms of being active within the conflict, and are the first to be targeted as well, and or people are afraid of them, especially young men, because they've either been part of the conflict, and although there are child soldier programs to do the demobilization of child soldiers, youth are often forgotten. If you're over 18, there's no program for you except the straight demobilization programs, which generally has been absent for years, and so youth are left completely behind. The next factor he talked about was education. There's an education gap. I think this was worldwide between the skills that are taught and what is needed in the market in general. And so people are taught essentially in schools where they're told, you know, this is how you get your office job, and there are no office jobs. And then the next thing he talked about is there's a need to create structured approaches. So having approaches that basically give youth how to plan out their businesses, because quite often it's just they see something someone else is doing and it's a copy-paste. Yeah. He made money doing it, but there's no actual planning and thought behind those processes. And so for him, there needs to be a policy in place to ensure that there be these structured approaches to employment and that these are sort of formal processes. And And then one that I'm adding in is actually in regards to gender, because one of the main access to employment issues, especially for girls in DRC, is actually gender roles themselves, because it's in certain cases almost impossible to get girls into certain sectors of employment, just in terms of what the gender norms and roles are. And so it actually is quite a challenge itself. So those are some of the main policy issues that are actually coming out. In terms of formal policy initiatives with the government here has been toying for about 7 or 8 years with a professional training and education policy. The education policy overall has come out, but a professional training policy has not. But one of the factors in DRC is there's actually great policy and laws that are written. It's the implementation that is lacking.
Yes, that old nugget.
Because I would say a lot of the processes for policy are actually supported by major international institutions, be it the UN, be it different NGOs, so there actually is receptivity, but then when it comes to actually implementing it in budget allocations, it's a lot more challenging.
Yeah, thanks very much for grounding us and for those great contributions from you and your colleague. So we're now at the end of our initial session today. So I just wanted to very briefly summarize some of the issues and areas that have been brought up. So from Bangladesh and Vietnam, we had particularly the issue of working with young migrants being of particular relevance to our LRP country program work. And in Bangladesh, bringing up as well the needs and particular lack of engagement with youth with disability was brought out there. In DRC, the training centres model, but also this potential partnership between youth groups and government in terms of accountability and decision making will be particularly interesting to follow. We unfortunately didn't hear from Timothy from Uganda, but they've also been doing sort of some campaigning work around youth unemployment, and we'll be taking forward those unexpected workshops that have just been kick-started in Bangladesh that we'll be sharing. So I just wanted to say thanks to everyone. Some of these discussions will be taking forward in the new D group. So our community of practice, which was a listserv, is now going to move over to a really exciting online platform, which is a D group. So then either today or tomorrow, in the next couple of days, you'll be getting an invite, which is a much snazzier, interesting way of us sharing and learning, and we'll continue this discussion around youth unemployment and our analysis of it in that space. So it's just to flag that up. And essentially, it's now really key from an international perspective for us to be looking at developing what our role and niche is in terms of tackling the youth unemployment crisis. So this really is the start of that process alongside those unexpected workshops. So thank you to everyone for joining. Did anyone have any final comments or suggestions? No, thanks very much to Casper, our tech support over in ActionAid Denmark, and look forward to continuing these conversations via our D Group community of practice. It's bye from London.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.